Okay, so today we're going to be covering the urinary and reproductive systems of chapter 23, which is the last chapter in the lab book that you guys are responsible for. Okay, so we will not be meeting again until Tuesday. Well, we won't be meeting at all, right? On Tuesday, the 23rd, I believe that's a Tuesday, but June 23rd will be the second lab exam, the final lab exam. Also on that date, you have to hand in your lab manuals. That's the last day you can hand in your lab manual. So you can start handing in your lab manuals tomorrow. I will be sending out an email tonight on how best to do it. Basically, what I need is PDF files. If you find that if you're able to combine your PDF files, that's great. But if it ends up being too large a file for your email, you can break it up into chapters. All right, just make sure that you name each file with your name and the correct chapter number. And that way I can keep track of it. All right. But you still have until Tuesday to hand in the lab books. All right, so there's no rush until Tuesday. Okay, so the last portion of the fetal pig that we're going to be covering is the urinary system and the reproductive system. And we'll start off with the urinary system. So basically, the first organ that we're dealing with are the kidneys. And the kidneys are basically the main filters of your body. You have a pair of them because we are symmetrical, right? What's on the left is on the right. And the kidneys will filter your blood of toxins. It'll filter your blood of, like foreign toxins, and as well as the toxins produced by your cells. And what I mean by that is the metabolic waste. After the cells process the sugar from digestion and other nutrients, there's chemical waste that's produced, and the cells get rid of it into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream takes it into the kidneys. And what happens is that at the site of the kidneys, there's a structure called the kidneys themselves are composed of millions of nephrons. And each nephron is composed of something that looks similar to what's here in this diagram. You have the arteries bringing blood, and the first portion of the nephron is the glomerulus. The glomerulus is the filtration unit. So it'll filter the blood. It'll allow blood and oxygen and things like that to pass, but oxygen and sugars, things like that. But waste products will not be able to pass through. All right. So here we go. The glomerulus filters your blood, and then whatever passes through goes through this tube. And this tube, as you can see, is heavily covered in capillaries. The capillaries will recover whatever the body needs from this filtered material. Okay, so the tubule returns needed substances to your blood. So, for example, it might decide that you need more salt, so don't get rid of too much salt. The salt is the best example. So you tend to think of the kidneys getting rid of salt, right? Because when you eat salty food, all of a sudden you feel thirsty, right? And then you have to pee. And that's because the kidneys are detecting high salts in your system, and the kidneys will filter out the salt. But on the other hand, if you're in a situation where you haven't had enough salt, salt is very important. The kidneys also function in maintaining the salt level at the appropriate level. So if that means conserving the salt, all the better. Okay, so here's a look at the nephrons again. Basically, well, let's start off with the kidney. Okay, so here we have the kidney, and you have the outer meaty portion, which is the cortex. And inside, you have these like little cavities, which are called the medulla. Multiple. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Now inside these medulla, these medulla are lined by the nephrons. Right, so here's the glomerulus. Here's the blood vessels that go to the glomerulus, and the tubules. Okay, this is more or less what it really looks like. Okay, so the end result, of course, is the production of urine. Right. And here's a diagram of what it looks like, right? The kidneys, and by the way, the adrenal gland is right above it, which is a gland for hormones, right? And then famous for releasing adrenaline in those moments of shock or fear response. Okay, so you have the kidneys, and how do the kidneys get the urine out? Well, they get them out through this tube, which is the ureter. All right, and it goes into the bladder, and from the bladder to the urethra. Okay, so here it is again. Okay, here's the adrenal gland, the kidney. So you have the kidney, and you have, where is that? You have the kidney. Let's color that in yellow, and you have the renal vein, right? Because this is the vena cava. You have the renal artery, because this is the aorta. And then, how does the urine get out? Okay, it gets out through the ureter, which connects to the urinary bladder. Okay, so here is the urinary bladder. And here's the other ureter. The other ureter is right here. All right. So the urinary bladder has an entry point for one ureter here, right there, and another entry point for another ureter there. And then the urine leaves the bladder through the urethra in this direction. Now I colored that in orange. Okay, so here's the urethra, and that's the tube colored here. And the tube in females will stay around this direction and will join with the vaginal opening. However, with the males, the tube will go in and join the penis, and it will become the main exit tube of the penis. So here it is. Okay. I'll cover that again. All right. So here you can see the kidney. There's another one over here somewhere. Over here. Underneath all those intestines. Okay. Here's the aorta. Okay. You can see it there. And the vena cava. And the green thing is the rectum. So let me They didn't bother labeling this one. So that's the rectum, the green one. All right, and let's hope this yellow stuff is visible. Well, let's make it green. All right, from the kidneys, you have the ureter. Okay, this big tube that enters the urinary bladder. So that's the ureter, which enters the urinary bladder. So here's the urinary bladder. Okay. And then the urinary bladder, this looks like this male because of the scrotum. The urinary bladder has an exit point over here where it becomes the urethra. It empties out the urine into the urethra, which is going through here. And there is the opening of the penis. So all of this is penis there. All right. Now, so know your kidneys, know your ureter. You should be able to recognize the aorta, the renal vein, kidney. Of course, you should be able to recognize the spleen and the liver. Not the topic for today. You should be able to recognize the vena cava, renal artery, and the urinary bladder. And the urethra is also important. From another picture, you can see it. Let me see. Okay. Here's the kidney. On the other side, there's the ureter. Okay. And it's entering the urinary bladder, which is this. And then the ureter go out this way. All right, so make sure you have these terms correct. You have the urethra, I apologize. The urethra will come out this way. Underneath all this. Let me do that again. You see this flap here? That's a flap that would have been in this direction had the pig been intact. So here's the umbilical cord, for example. Okay. So that means the penis is right around here on the other side of this flesh. This is the urinary bladder. Here is the ureter and the kidney. So the urethra will pass underneath until it reaches the exit point of the penis. Right, that's the better way to describe it. Okay, so you should know, of course, the terms you should know. You should know the kidney, which leads to the ureter, which leads to the urinary bladder. Somebody every semester confuses the urinary bladder with the gallbladder, so don't do that. Kidney, ureter, urinary bladder. And then you have the urethra and then urogenital opening. Okay, so that's the way it goes. Kidney, ureter. From the kidney will empty the urine through the ureter, which takes it to the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder empties out into the urethra, and the urethra will lead to the urogenital opening. Okay, so that hopefully is enough for you guys in terms of explaining the situation with the urinary system. Now, moving on to the male reproductive system. All right. The first thing you need to know, of course, are the testes. The testes or testis, testicle is synonymous. Testicle and testis. Plural is testes. These organs that produce the sperm cells. Directly surrounding each testis is an epididymis, which is an organ for the storage of sperm cells as they will mature there. The sperm cells will complete their maturation and await ejaculation. The vas deferens are the tubes that take the sperm during ejaculation out of the male. So you can also call them the sperm ducts. So vas deferens or sperm duct. And basically they're connecting to the urethra. And the urethra is the last tube, right? The urethra runs through the penis and forms part of the male reproductive system. It's the exit tube for the sperm. And the penis, you should have a good definition for it, is the male organ of copulation. All right, so if you're looking at your pig from the outside, right before dissection, like we did on the first day, I think, yeah, Monday. And I showed you guys the difference between male and female. Okay, so males have a scrotum, which is a sac here. That's where the testes will be. However, here's the umbilical cord, and just posterior to that is the urogenital opening. That's the opening of the urethra in the penis. So this thing here, underneath the skin, would be the penis. Okay, so if we were in lab, you guys would be feeling it. You'd be able to feel the urethra. Taking a look on the inside, okay, so your kidneys are over here somewhere, and there's a ureter connects to there, right here, right, and connects to the urinary bladder. Right, so this is the urinary bladder. However, let's look at this stuff. Here is a testis, and it's covered in a thin membrane, which is similar to the mesenteries that I spoke to you about before. And you have to cut through those in order to see the details. Basically, you have the testis there and the epididymis there. Okay. And you have the spermatic cord, which includes the vas deferens. And they'll go, let me see, let me do this here. So the vas deferens, which will join the urethra here. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, I'm back. Thank you. All right, so again, you have the testes here and the testis here and the epididymis surrounding it. And the vas deferens, which take the sperm out of the epididymis, will come up here and will join with the urethra. All right, and there are several glands that provide seminal fluid to the sperm so that they're able to travel far into the female. So you have a bulbourethral gland, but I'm not going to hold you to that one. All right, so don't worry about that. What I want you to know, of course, is the vas deferens and the testis, penis and urethra, urinary bladder. Okay, here it is again. Here, I included this picture because it shows exactly what I was talking about. The actual testis, that's the little dark circular structure right there. And then the little, the elongated structure above it that looks like it has little lines on it, that's the epididymis. Okay, so you get a clear picture of what that would look like. And here's another one. Okay. This is the urinary bladder, which is this structure here. And the urethra seems like it's going this way. So it's going, the urethra is going in this direction. Here's the penis, the opening of the penis. So that's the easy part. Now for the complex stuff. The female reproductive system. All right, let's start with the ovaries. The ovaries, of course, are the organs that produce the egg cells. And the thing about it is that the ovaries have created the egg cells by the time the female is born, especially in humans. Human females are born with all the eggs that they'll ever make. But the only difference is that the egg cells take a very long time to mature. All right, so the egg cells can take 40 to 50 years before they're released. All right, so in this case, here we have the ovary. Here's another one. This has been cut open so you can see the follicle cells that mature the egg cell. Okay, that's basically the secondary oocyte. And the egg cell you see is trying to reach the fallopian tubes, which is this. Okay, so the fallopian tubes are the oviducts. You can call them the oviducts. And they transport the egg to the uterus. Right, as the egg is released from the ovary, the egg is transported by the fallopian tube. Now, for humans, it's basically, on average, or usually is what I want to say, one egg per cycle. But for other animals, for example, a tapeworm, not a tapeworm, a roundworm, which is Ascaris, which is an intestinal parasite, will be moving thousands of eggs almost on a daily basis. Every cycle ends on a daily basis. And you have all sorts of things in between, right? Like birds, which will lay 3 eggs per season, per year, or 3 or 8 or whatever. Depends on the species. So, talk about the fallopian tubes. So you have the fallopian tubes that start around here. But if you haven't noticed, the ovary does not directly touch the fallopian tubes. All right, so at the end of the fallopian tubes, you have these things called fimbriae. The fimbriae are like finger-like extensions that increase the surface area of the opening of the fallopian tube. Because as the egg is released, it has to make a little jump. It jumps from the egg, from the ovary to the fallopian tube. This is a little, right there, this is a little synapse. I mean, it's bigger than a synapse. It's like a little space, we'll call it. All right, and so the fimbriae increase the surface area and therefore increase the chances that the egg cell will make it. into the fallopian tube. Right. So, I mean, it almost completely surrounds the egg, the ovary. So the egg really has nowhere else to go, even though they're not directly connected. All right. So the uterus, you should have a definition in mind, is the receiving chamber for the egg. If the egg is fertilized, then the uterus is also the site of implantation of the egg. And where is it implanting? All right, so the development of the embryo occurs in the endometrium. All right, so that's a thick lining, which is here, a thick lining of the uterus. And it's composed of a lot of blood vessels and nutritive material. So the egg, once it attaches to the endometrium, this is what happens in mammals anyway, the egg is able to absorb nutrition from the mother through the endometrium. Okay. All right, moving on. We have the vagina. This is the birth canal, which is here. Notice that it's ringed. Okay. And it's the organ of sexual intercourse. Now, it's separated from the uterus through a structure called the cervix, right? Which is right here, which is a muscular structure that opens during birth. So the fetus can move out of the uterus and into the birth canal. Right? The uterus is a very muscular and very strong structure, and the cervix is just as strong, and it only opens when it receives a certain amount of hormones, certain types of hormones, which are released just before giving birth. And those hormones will direct the cervix to dilating, opening. Okay. So you have the uterus, and then a little indentation here. Okay, and that's where the cervix is, and then you have the vagina. Yeah. All right. Now, what happens in the exit point? All right, you have a urogenital opening. You have a urogenital opening for the female that is common to the urethra and the vagina. This opening is also known as the urogenital sinus in the fetal pig, and I mean the fetal pig, not the adult pig. So in the fetal pig, basically the two openings are fused, so we call it the urogenital sinus. As the pig matures, the two openings separate, so you have one opening. At the urogenital opening, you have the urethra, and separately you have the vagina. Okay, so if you were looking at it in real life, you would see some papilla, some genital papilla around the opening. Just dorsal to this, you have the opening of the anus, and opening, of course, remember it's called the urogenital opening. Right, we have two views of that here. Now, what about the inside? Okay, so this is a little bit hard in this picture, but if you guys, this is from that website that I gave you on Monday. So if you guys go over there, you'll be able to see it up close, a little bit closer. You have the ovaries here, here, and you have these coiled tubes. Okay, let's see if I can do that. There you go. Those coiled tubes are the oviducts. Okay, and as here they're calling them the horn of the uterus. All right, so what we have is the ovary and the oviducts. All right, and okay, here's the uterus. Here is the horn. Okay, you have ovary, oviducts, horn. Maybe I'll draw that in the whiteboard. So it's a bit of an interesting structure. Then right around here is a cervix, and note the vagina follows after. And look here, because you'll be able to see that the urethra, coming from the urinary bladder, is joining with the vagina. So it becomes one opening right here. And there's the urogenital opening. Here's a better look. Okay. So you have the ovary there, here. It's a little round structure. So if I were to use if I were to use a picture for female reproductive system on the test, I would use this picture. You have the ovary and the oviducts forming the horn of the uterus, these tubules, as the oviducts, and they form the horn of the uterus. Okay, and this has not been cleared, but you have the urinary bladder in the way of the picture. All right, and if you were to move the urinary bladder out, you would see the uterus and the vaginal opening. Okay, sorry, not the opening, just the vagina there, and then you have the cervix here. Okay. So let me see if I can draw this out for you guys. Here you have the ovary, the fimbriae, the oviducts, then you have the uterine horn, here's another ovary, another oviduct. Okay, the uterine horn is only for the fetal pig, and what they mean by that is you have that pinching section right there, and then you have the uterus. The position of the cervix, and then the vaginal canal. All right, and remember, you have the kidneys. Oops. Try to erase it. I don't want to erase the whole entire thing. So, and then you have the ureters, which enter the bladder, and that exits as a urethra. Okay, we'll color it thick. Which joins the vaginal canal. So this is the urinary bladder. Here's the urethra. Here's the ureter. Okay, you have the kidneys. All right, so that's the way it goes for this, for the female. Oh, and I forgot to name, this is the uterine horn. Okay, kind of looks like a pair of horns, right? Because of this constriction here. Okay, so you have the ovary here and here. Oviducts or fallopian tube, let's call it oviducts, which become the uterine horn, create the uterine horn. Or if you're going from the direction of the vagina, then the uterine horn becomes the oviducts or fallopian tubes, and then meet the ovaries. Anyway, but we're coming in from the ovaries. From the ovaries, the oviducts, to the uterine horn, to the uterus, which is very muscular. Okay. It's kind of like a cross-hatching of muscle. And then the cervix and the vaginal canal. All right, now let's go to the last chapter in the book, and we'll go over the lab chapter. Okay. All right. So you guys can read through this, basically the same information I gave you, and we'll do some of these questions. Sequence the organs in the urinary system to trace the path of urine from its production to its exit. All right, so I'll give you guys a hint, right? You guys can fill it out. We'll start off with the kidneys. And the last bit will be the urethra. Okay, so what goes in between? You guys, I gave you the answers already, so you guys can look it up. Now we're going to do the male reproductive system. Okay. Sequence the organs in the male reproductive system to trace the path of sperm from the organ of production to the penis. What's the organ of production? That's the testis. You can say testes, plural. Right? And then you have, don't forget the epididymis. Okay. Okay, right there. Then you have the vas deferens. Then you have the urethra. And then the penis. Location of the penis in male, fetal pig, and human. In the fetal pig, remember, it is, I guess you can just say, next to posterior of umbilical cord. In humans, all right, the genitals, I guess you can say the groin. right? And again, and here you can see you have the epididymis surrounding the testis, and then have the vas deferens, which join the urethra and out the penis. Now for the female reproductive system. Okay. The vagina plays a critical role in reproduction, even though development of the offspring occurs in the uterus. Explain. Well, it's the definition I gave you of what the vagina is, right? You guys can fill it out. So fill this out. I gave you the exact answer. Okay. Comparison of fetal pig and human female. The oviducts in the fetal pig form uterine horn. Okay, no uterine horn. The uterus, what's the comparison? See, this one doesn't have a uterine horn. You see that? Here you have the uterus itself as compared to the female pig, right? Which did this thing. And then you had the uterus. Okay, so in humans, you don't have this. Okay. So the uterus itself for the fetal pig, I mean, I'm not too sure what they want in comparison because the uterus itself is going to be the same, right? It's the site of implantation, you can say, site of embryo development, same thing. Urogenital sinus. Okay, so it's definitely something that's present in the female pig and absent in humans. Remember the urogenital sinus. So for example, in the human, here's a ureter, right? It's going off in a different direction than the vagina. But remember that in the fetal pig, it wasn't true, right? In the fetal pig, you have the urethra joining with the birth canal. All right, so that's the end of that. And the next section of the chapter is a review of everything we've seen this week. All right, so using, let's see. Okay, make it a little bit bigger. Okay, using these terms, bronchiole, bronchus, glottis, larynx, pharynx, trachea, trace the path of air. So remember, we start off with the nasal passage, and then we have the nasal, well, I don't know if that's the nasal. Let's go backwards. I don't know if they want to include the nasal cavity. So what leads to the lungs? You have the bronchiole. And the bronchioles are coming from the bronchus. Or the bronchi, which split from the trachea. And the first part of the trachea is the larynx. The opening of the trachea is the glottis. Oh, and of course they want the pharynx. Okay. Remember the pharynx being the common opening between the nasal, the air passage tubes and the food passage tubes. Okay, so you have the nasal passages or the nasal cavity into the pharynx, into the glottis, into the larynx, into the trachea, bronchus, bronchiole, and then the lungs. In the pharynx, you should be able to locate the glottis, an opening to the trachea. Here's the pharynx. Okay. Now the digestive system. Um, Using these terms, trace the path of food from the mouth to the anus. Oh, from the mouth to the pharynx. Well, why don't they have the pharynx in this one? Here's the large intestine. Then you have the small intestine, which connects to the stomach and esophagus, which connects to the mouth. Okay. So don't worry about this. Um, Record the length of the small intestine. If we were to take out the small intestine, uh, it would be about 1 meter in length, which is 3 feet. Okay, where does the bile duct come from? And that would be the gallbladder. Find the cecum, a projection where the small intestine enters the large intestine. How does the appearance of the pig's large intestine differ from that of a human? Don't worry about this, guys. You didn't have to see that. And then record the length of the large intestine. So we're not going to worry about that here. Okay. Although the large intestine is shorter than the small intestine. It's large because of the thickness. It's called the large intestine because it's thicker, not because it's longer. Trace the path of blood through the heart, starting with the vena cava and ending with the aorta. Mention all the chambers of the heart and the valves. So this is a good review. Okay, so from the vena cava, we enter the right atrium. Remember the 4 chambers of the heart. From the right atrium, it will enter the right ventricle, but it has to pass through a valve. Reverse alphabetical order, something cuspid, right? Tricuspid. Tricuspid valve. So right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle. The right ventricle pumps the blood to the pulmonary artery. It's called the pulmonary trunk. But it has to pass through another valve. So that's the pulmonary semilunar. Right? Remember that? Pulmonary semilunar valve. So right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, pulmonary semilunar valve, pulmonary trunk, and then the pulmonary arteries. Remember that arteries take the blood away from the heart. Now coming in from the lungs, we're coming back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had changed the color. Okay. Because now it's oxygenated blood. Pulmonary, so it's bright red. Pulmonary veins, these are oxygenated. And then you have the left atrium. And when it leaves the left atrium, it goes into the left ventricle. And you have a valve that has to go through, which is called the bicuspid or mitral. You guys can just leave it at bicuspid. So pulmonary veins, left atrium, bicuspid valve, left ventricle. Okay. And then it goes through a valve to get into the aorta, which is the aortic semilunar. The aortic semilunar valve, which leads to the aorta. Okay, in general, the arteries take blood away from the heart, and veins take blood to the heart. Okay. So, locate the following blood vessels in your pig, which we discussed yesterday. State their origin and destination. Subclavian, the origin are the forelimbs. Okay. And the destination is the superior, not number 5, but an S. Okay, let me erase that. Superior vena cava. Okay, remember, subclavians are superior to the heart or anterior to the heart, so therefore they drain in the superior or anterior vena cava. The renal artery is draining the kidneys, and it's making its way to the inferior vena cava. So let me write a key here. S equals superior. I equals inferior. Oh, this is the renal artery. I apologize for that. I thought that they were doing... Okay. I just want to do the veins right now, that's why. All right. So what I wrote there actually goes over here. Straining the kidneys and joining the inferior vena cava. All right. And the iliac veins, I didn't discuss it too much yesterday because I'm not holding you guys to it, but you can copy this. It's the hind limbs. This is draining the hind limbs. That's the legs, right, for people. And it's joining the inferior vena cava. Now, if you're talking about the head and the head region, then the jugular vein will be draining the head, and it's joining the superior vena cava. The cardiac vein is the vein that drains the heart tissue. And it's also joining the superior vena cava. Doing the arteries, you have the coronary artery, which is the opposite of the cardiac. So it supplies the heart tissue on the outside, right? And it comes from the aorta, all right? And specifically from the brachiocephalic branches of the aorta. The carotid artery is going to supply the head and brain, right? And well, okay, I see. So let me move this. First, we have to state the origin and then the destination. So the origin is the aorta, is basically what I wrote, but backwards, and the destination is the head. Okay, in this case, again, the aorta, and the destination is the heart. The subclavian artery, again from the aorta, and the destination is the forelimbs, or are the forelimbs. Forelimbs. The renal artery, again from, well, let's call it dorsal aorta this time. Dorsal aorta. And the destination are the kidneys. And the iliac is the opposite of the iliac vein. The iliac artery would be the opposite of the iliac vein. It's coming from the dorsal aorta, and the destination are the hind limbs. Okay. So I'm not going to test you on the hepatic portal, so don't worry about the hepatic portal. Don't worry about that. And that brings us to the end. Okay, what two individual systems make up the urogenital system? That would be the urinary plus reproductive. What is the cavity-like space in the kidney called? Okay, medulla. Okay, they're talking about, let's see, where would that be? This structure. Okay, these are the medulla. What organ stores urine before it is transported to the outside? And that would be the urinary bladder. And again, don't confuse it with the gallbladder. And don't confuse the gallbladder with the urinary bladder. The gallbladder is attached to the liver. Okay, what structure associated with the urinary system transports urine and sperm? And that would be the urethra. Where are sperm stored while they mature? Well, that would be the epididymis. Epidid. I always forget how to spell this. I know there's a Y in there somewhere. Maybe it's this one. When descending, what do the testes travel through to get to the scrotal sac? That would be the inguinal canal. So remember, when it's a fetus, the testes are not in the scrotum, they're much higher up. And as they pass through the body to get to the scrotum, they're passing through a canal, which is called the inguinal canal. What accessory gland for reproduction in human males is inferior posterior to the urinary bladder? Don't worry about that because we didn't cover it. What female reproductive structures transmits to the location where embryos/fetuses develop? That would be the fallopian tubes. Where in a pig are the embryos, fetuses located during development? Same as any other mammal, the uterus, any other mammal except the monotremes and the marsupials at a certain stage. Remember, the monotremes lay eggs, and the marsupials, the embryos, leave the uterus before they are fully mature. So, what female reproductive structure produces sex hormones? The ovaries. That's one of the functions of the ovaries. Produce a lot of estrogen and other hormones that are important. What respiratory structure has cartilaginous rings that keep the airway? Remember, I mentioned that before, the trachea. That's why it looks ringed. What does food travel through to enter the duodenum and leaving the stomach? Well, the duodenum is directly attached to the stomach, the duodenum being the first portion of the small intestine. And there is a sphincter there called the pyloric. I don't know if that's what they want, but you guys can go ahead and write it. Pyloric sphincter, okay, which opens up. I think I mentioned it to you guys. The pyloric sphincter opens up when the food is ready to pass from the stomach to the small intestine. What is the tissue surrounding the heart called? Um, we can leave it at the pericardium. Peri meaning surrounding, cardium meaning heart. What does blood pass through when it goes from one capillary to another without passing through the heart? Yeah. From one capillary bed to another. Oh, so what they're talking about is the tissue systems or organs, right? So it goes from the arteries to the capillaries. The capillaries bring the blood directly to the tissue system or the organ systems, to the cells that need the oxygen and the nutrition for digestion. And then the capillaries will continue until they join up with the veins and take the blood back to the heart. Okay, so we won't do this, so you guys don't have to do that. All right, I'm going to include some questions from this review chapter. So some of these questions will be on test, not too many. Okay, and then remember the exam will be a lot of identification. So make sure you guys study the flow charts and study the pictures like this. Okay. Is this something you guys have to do? What am I missing here? This page looks like it's missing something. All right. What the heck? I'll name it for you guys. All right. So these look like the ribs, or you could say the pleural cavity. Number 5 is the lungs. Oh, I apologize. Number 5 is the heart. Number 6 are the lungs. Number 15 is the diaphragm. Number 16 again is the lungs. I don't care what lobe of the lung. It's not important for us. Here you have the liver, number 14. Number 7 looks like the vena cava. Can't really tell, but it looks like it. Vena cava. That would be the inferior vena cava. Number 13, I think they're pointing at, it's kind of hard to tell from this angle. So number 12 is the umbilical cord. So forget 13. I can't even tell what that is. 8. I'm not sure. See, I'm not sure if they're trying to point at the kidneys. Are these intestines? This looks like large intestine. This looks like large intestine. And number 8, I'm not sure if they're pointing at the mesenteries, for example. This is small intestine. Number 9 is pointing at these red blood vessels, which are the umbilical arteries. And number 10 is therefore the urinary bladder. So I think 13 has to be the large intestine. Okay. So, up here also we have more stuff. You see it was missing half the picture. There you go. 17 is the carotid artery. And number 2 is the thyroid. Number 1 is the larynx. Number 3 still looks like the carotid. Remember, you have a right and a left carotid. So this would be the right carotid and this is the left. It doesn't matter to me. If you say carotid, you got it right. Yeah, so I would study those pictures. Study this. Okay. I know it seems like a lot, but you have about a week. If you studied from Monday, then you had more than a week. And the whole point of it is to learn about your body. So, it's time well spent, in my opinion. And hopefully you guys will walk away from this course with something that's worth it, that was worth your summer. All right, and so I'll be sending out messages as necessary throughout the week for the next 5 days or so, leading up to the exam. Work on the lab manuals. If you have questions, I'm always available. As always, I'm available by email, mostly for 3, but sometimes I answer the emails earlier too, so it doesn't hurt to try. All right, and Thanks, guys, and we'll be in contact.